This morning, President Biden announced that the rail unions have reached a tentative deal with the rail companies, thus avoiding a strike that was likely to happen by the end of the week. The deal reached by the unions might not be agreed upon by the workers, and I'll get to that in just a moment. But let's give you the details on this deal. First, we should note Bernie Sanders is the one who prevented, I should say, any type of legislative action or congressional action against the workers. There was some effort to essentially get Congress involved to prevent a strike from happening. But Bernie Sanders last night decided to block any type of congressional effort to do that. Yesterday, Republican senators tried to force the rail unions to accept the deal that was given to them by President Biden's mediation board a few weeks ago. Now, the deal contained modest pay raises that, by the way, did not surpass the inflation rate. But more importantly, the deal did not change the railroad companies' draconian attendance policies. And that was really what the hangup was about. The workers desperately needed time off without retaliation to deal with any type of life emergency, any type of illness, anything like that. Now, the workers currently have no policy for unpaid sick leave. Engineers and conductors, for instance, are stuck with a points-based system where attendance rules would require them to essentially work many days and sometimes consecutive weeks or months with no time off to make up for taking, let's say, a weekend off to deal with a medical emergency or any other type of emergency. Now, as I mentioned earlier, Bernie Sanders is the one who blocked Congress and any effort that Congress could have to essentially intervene and prevent the workers from striking. And he then took to the Senate floor to give this incredible speech. Let's take a look at that.
The rail workers in the United States are not asking for 1 year of paid sick leave. They're not asking for 6 months of paid sick leave. They are asking for 15 days. 15 days. Now, the rail industry has said, as I understand it, that they just cannot afford to do that, just don't have the money. And they say it would cost too much money to provide their workers with any paid sick days. Just can't afford to do it. Well, let's see. They made over $20 billion in profits last year. They provide their CEOs with huge compensation packages. And here's something else that everyone should know who's getting involved in this issue. Last year, the rail industry spent over $18 billion not to improve rail safety, not to address the supply chain crisis in America, but to buy back its own stock. It turns out that guaranteeing 15 paid sick days to rail workers would cost the industry a grand total of $688 million a year. That is less than 3.5% of their annual profits.
So Bernie Sanders getting involved in blocking the efforts of Congress to essentially intervene and really work on behalf of the employers here was really important because that forced the employers to engage in some concessions, right? And one of the concessions, which I don't think goes far enough, does address that time off issue, providing the workers with one additional day of paid time off per year, not even per month, per year. They also will not be retaliated against for any unpaid time off they need, let's say, medical.
Yeah. So, look, I don't want to assume that people know the business world. So let me just say some elementary things. So revenue is all the money you get into a company. Profits are what you have after you minus costs from revenue. So that's just money you take home, right? So if giving time off to your workers costs you 3.5% of your revenue, well, it depends on what kind of business you're running. If your margins are really tight, that could be a real issue, okay, even though the number sounds small. But if it's 3.5% of your profits, Well, that's just a matter of how you're sharing the profits of the company. And so you'd just be giving 3.5% of those profits more to your workers. Well, that's just a negotiation point about how you're going to share the winnings that you all have created together. And 3.5% in that context is a small number, a very small number. So the point that Bernie's making is indisputable, and one that you never hear in politics or media, which is all the time these guys claim, oh my God, I can't be decent to any of my employees because of the money that it would cost. Well, are you on the edge of bankruptcy? Are you on the edge of sustainability? Or are you making 20 billion in profits? So, and unfortunately, as I read a lot of articles about this today and in other days, most of the articles paint it as these strikes could really hurt the country, and it would be the workers who would be creating this problem. It never frames it as it's the companies who are creating the problem by underpaying or undertaking care of their workers. Never. And in one of the articles today, they claim that a lucrative offer had been made in another strike. You know if it's lucrative or not. The way that they just support corporations in the press is unbelievable.
Yeah, because they are corporations. The press is owned by corporations. So they don't care about the workers. And look, for anyone who isn't a CEO at a corporation, an executive, an owner, whatever it is, right? If you're against the striking workers here and you're more concerned with the impact a strike like this will have on the economy, that is the direct result of this country for decades conditioning you to think of yourself not as a fellow worker, not as someone who's also victimized by the same system of greed and, this never-ending priority of focusing on profit motives. It's because you've been conditioned to think of yourself as a consumer as opposed to a worker. But at the end of the day, if you're not the owner of a company, if you're not the head of a corporation, if you're not an executive yourself, you are a worker in your own context. And you should take a look at how you're being treated in your workplace, right? So just to give you an example, CNN, here's a tweet. This is a perfect tweet to kind of demonstrate what we're trying to talk about here when it comes to the corporate media's coverage of the potential strike. CNN had tweeted, 60,000 railroad workers could walk off the job as soon as Friday. It's about the last thing the U.S. economy needs. A prolonged strike could mean some empty shelves in stores, temporary closures at factories, and higher prices on various consumer goods. And it's all about pitting fellow Americans against one another. It's understandable for corporations to have this perspective because corporations don't care about whether or not a worker is going to be retaliated against if he or she needs to take a day off for an illness or for a family emergency. Corporations care about their bottom line. They care about the profit. That's first and foremost. But for ordinary people who are also part of this system where they get nickel and dimed, they get no benefits, they get no support, understand you might be a consumer, but at the end of the day, you're also a worker. And it's much more important to stand in solidarity with these rail workers than to go along with the corporate media narrative of, oh my God, the shelves might be empty. You'll be all right.
Yeah. But even if you're not, quote unquote, all right, like, do I want that to happen? No, of course, I want everything to run smoothly. But whose fault is it? Why does literally everyone in the media assume that it would be the strikers' fault? Why isn't it the company's fault for not paying them right, for not allowing them to have sick days? But the assumption is the workers are always wrong and the corporations are always right, and everything is the fault of the employees. It takes two to tango. And finally, to CNN, I thought that they had gotten a very important order from the new owners to be balanced. Oh, you meant balanced towards only Republicans, but not to workers, not to the poor, not to the middle class, not to the left, not to progressives, not to any of those people. Balance my ass. Basically what they told them, and I see them all obeying on TV every day, get back to supporting corporate rule, which is center right.
So I want to give you the final agreement. And again, this is just the agreement between the rail employers and the unions. The workers still have to vote on this, and there is still some dissent among workers. So we'll see how this all plays out. So here's what we know is in the deal. There will be an immediate 14% pay raise that is backdated to 2020. It also raises the total amount to 24% over the 5-year span of the contract. There are also $1,000 cash bonuses every year. It has not yet fully announced the changes that have been made to the attendance policy, but we do know some details according to what the union has, or the unions have communicated to the public. As I mentioned earlier, there will only be one additional paid day off per year. Insane. Worker protections against discipline if they need to take some time off to attend a routine or preventative medical care, appointment, doctor's appointment, exemptions from attendance policies for hospitalizations and surgical procedures. You guys just let that sink in for a second. If they had a medical emergency and they couldn't make it to work because of that medical emergency, they would be retaliated against. This isn't even a debate about more paid time off. This is just a debate about hey, if something bad happens to us and we need to go to the doctor, can we just not get fired or reprimanded for that? That's all they were asking for. And it took them literally years. It took a potential strike that would have an impact on the economy for them to finally agree to the bare minimum. But instead, the rail workers aren't buying it. For instance, Jonah Fetterman, a reporter at Labor Notes, writes, one rail worker's anonymous take, it's a garbage deal. Everyone hates it so far. Nothing for me. I'll vote no. This has been a complete waste of time. And that sentiment was shared by other workers on social media as well, as you can see from the screen. Why is our union posting this like this is some kind of game-changing deal? One day is laughable. We need to strike. Another writes, the paying members didn't agree to this, and better pay was demanded also. So we'll see how it plays out, but it doesn't appear that the workers agree that this is a great deal that they should move forward on. Cenk.
All right, last couple of things here. The reason why the unions would agree to a deal, the union heads would agree to a deal right now, is because I guarantee you, even if it's not a great deal, I guarantee you that the Democratic Party officials are yelling at them at the top of their lungs. We're about to have an election. This would mess with inflation. Are you nuts? Just strike a deal, any deal. But wait a minute, the unions give money to the Democratic Party, not the other way around. So why does the Democratic Party listen to every corporate order, but then yells at the unions to heel to corporations? So if the workers don't want it, then don't take it. And so, and understand what Bernie Sanders was doing. Corporations use everything at their disposal. They use the media to bully you into submission. They use their politicians, and they were just going to vote to say the strikers don't have a choice. They must take the deal. And it's government tyranny that's going to make them do it. We're going to take their freedom away. And Bernie said, no, you're not going to take their freedom away just because they're workers. Just imagine a world where you turned on your local news or cable news and you heard, this strike could create a giant infrastructure problem in America and exacerbate inflation. So why won't the railroad companies just pay them? They've already made $20 billion last year. This would be 3.5% of just their profits, not even their revenue. Why won't the railroad companies do it? Why are they endangering the entire economy by not paying their workers? Isn't it weird that you've heard the exact opposite 1,000 times, but you've never heard that version in American media?
Anyway, we got to take a break. Let's do that. When we come back, we've got more news, including a Republican governor caught on tape musing the possibility of banning contraceptives. We'll be right back.
All right, back on TYT, Cenk and Anna with you guys, and also Dr. Sugar Johnson just joined by hitting the join button below on YouTube. We appreciate it. TYT.com/join. For everybody else, this is a good time to do it because we're about to give away something to members later today. All right, Casper, go ahead.
Let's do it.
In my Constitution class, we're talking about how like the Dobbs decision went back to the states. During that, can you like ban Plan B in that process since everything's now at the state level? Because I mean,
well, you can, you can take up pretty much everything, but you ain't got to be in legislative session to do that.
Is that something you would?
January.
Is that something you could do? I mean, obviously after you win and everything.
Just depends on where the legislators are.
But if they're on board, we can do that. Because I mean, look,
I think I'd have to check and see. I mean, there's a lot of legalities.
You just heard from Georgia's Republican Governor Brian Kemp speaking to an individual who caught him on tape admitting that there would be some interest in, banning contraceptions like Plan B, which isn't surprising. We know that the Republican Party has been targeting contraceptives, particularly Plan B, for quite some time now. Now, while he didn't straight up say that that was on the agenda, that's the first order of business should he get reelected, fact of the matter is it is something that Republicans are eyeing. It is something that Clarence Thomas, in his concurring opinion to reverse Roe v. Wade, had referenced. And to give you some more context, where did that video come from? Apparently, there was a Democratic source who handed that over to the Heartland Signal. And Kemp had made that statement during a public appearance at the University of Georgia just last week. I should also note that Kemp has signed one of the most restrictive abortion laws in the country. He did so in 2019, which bans all abortions after the sound or after a fetus has fetal heartbeat activity. And I say heartbeat activity because it's not really a heartbeat, but nonetheless, if there's any sound coming from the heart of the fetus, the woman seeking an abortion would be denied one in the state of Georgia, thanks to the restrictions that Kemp had signed into law in that state. Cenk.
Yeah. So, look, I don't love the argument that they're going to come for contraception next because, wait, they just came for women's freedom. So we don't have to do the next. This thing right now is already terrible. You don't have to worry about the next terrible thing that they're doing. We're in the middle of the terrible thing they're doing now, right? But could they go after contraception? Sure, of course they could. I mean, look, it does. They don't really care how unpopular it is, and so I think 99% of adult women exception, and Clarence Thomas put it into play. And why? Why would you be against contraception? How does it hurt anybody, right? I mean, theoretically, in the abortion issue, they say, no. It's not that we hate the women or want to control their bodies like we used to in the good old days. It's that we care deeply about zygotes. I mean, we don't care about actual born human beings, but we care about zygotes and fetuses. Okay, but in contraception, there isn't one, right? And they're like, yeah, okay, fine. We just want to control women, and we want to use our religion as an excuse, and we want to terrorize your lives and say, you can't do that. You must do this. I'm back in control, and you will do as your husband tells you. I mean, the government. Wait, does that make it any better? No, you know who they are. They've always been around.
Yeah, and it's something really interesting is happening in the country where the leverage that the religious voting bloc had has kind of like waned. Because back in the day, especially after Roe v. Wade in 1973, you had evangelical leaders coming together, trying to find ways to galvanize religious voters, organize them, galvanize them. And back then, there was far more participation in religious institutions in this country. Now there's been a shift away. Individuals who might feel that they're spiritual or religious are kind of rejecting these established religious organizations, which has led to evangelical voters and that religious voting bloc essentially losing some of the leverage that they have in politics. Why do I say that? Well, I mention it because, look, you see this 50-year-long battle culminate with the reversal of Roe. That was first and foremost, that is what the religious voting bloc wanted in this country. Now that it's happened, we see the kind of backlash it has led to for the Republican Party, because it turns out that most people don't agree with stripping rights away from women. Most people don't agree with the government making decisions on behalf of couples when it comes to their reproductive rights and things like that. And so now all of a sudden, I'm actually questioning whether Republicans are stupid enough to pursue like contraception bans after they've seen that the country is not with them when it comes to banning abortion?
Yeah. Well, so I think that the answer is about activating voters. And I think that the voting population has changed in the country. Remember, it's been 50 years, right?
Yep.
But this is a really important point, guys, and it's true for student debt relief too. So for people who care about abortion, it not only superseded all other issues, but it made it about 100% likely that they were going to show up to vote, right? So whereas other issues might have been tangential to their lives, this one they felt was central because they thought, oh my God, I've got to save those babies. That's the propaganda that they heard, right? But for the pro-choice voters, it was issue number 37 because it was already law. They didn't have to fight it out. They voted on other issues, right? Same thing with student debt relief, but on the flip side, people who don't like student debt relief, they think, well, I don't like it, but it's issue number 37 to me, right? But for people who got student debt relief, it's issue number 1, right? And they're going to go vote based on that. So, but to Anna's point, now abortion used to activate these voters. But number 1, it's now activated the other voters because it's illegal in some places now and potentially illegal in a lot more places if they don't get activated. And number 2, their own side is not as big as it used to be. Evangelical, very religious voters 50 years ago were a giant block of voters. Now it's been whittled down partly because the young are more progressive and less religious and they could research things online and they don't have to believe whatever their lying fundamentalist pastor is telling them.
Yeah, exactly. So we'll see how it plays out. I also want to be real, right? So while I can't stand Brian Kemp, I feel like the way that video was kind of like advertised to the world is making it seem as though he said like, oh, it's the first thing we're going to do. We're going to focus on banning Plan B. He didn't say that, but the important thing to keep in mind is that Republican lawmakers and honestly politicians in general, they're not leaders, right? They're not interested in leading. They're not interested in doing what's right for their constituents. They do what they think they exploit issues that they think will help them in their political careers. So the idea that they're motivated by their ideology or motivated by principles or values is laughable, especially when we're talking about Republican lawmakers who oftentimes get caught up in sex scandals, illicit activity, all sorts of things that they love to moralize about when other people are doing it.
Yeah,
right.
And I think you're right. I think that he was kind of trying to parlay that question or get rid of that question because he was uncomfortable because his base wants him to just control women's lives in every possible way. But remember, all he really cares about is his donors, and the donors did not give that command. That's kind of why they're pissed at Lindsey Graham. They're like, we were using this issue as a fake issue just to get tax cuts. Lindsey, you're not supposed to actually force people to vote on it. If you do, we're going to get slaughtered because the American people don't agree with us. They know it too.
Exactly. All right. Well, let's move on to a pretty spicy topic because God forbid anyone has any nuance in discussing this. But I do think this is a far more nuanced discussion than the two sides of the political spectrum would have you believe. So let's talk about the migrant crisis. Florida Governor Ron DeSantis has decided to send 2 planes full of migrants, most of whom are Venezuelan migrants, over to Martha's Vineyard to essentially engage in a PR stunt. Let's not get that twisted, but also send a message about how, well, if these liberal cities across the country, and especially on the coast, love allowing immigrants into the country, maybe we should send them over to where they're living. Now, I just want to say, based on what I've read about how the people living in Martha's Vineyard have welcomed these 2 planes full of migrants, I'm really proud of how the community has come together. You know, they do have a housing crisis there as well, but they're trying to get everyone together to figure out solutions to accommodate these migrants. There's some indication that the migrants were also lied to by Ron DeSantis. Remember, no local government can just force migrants to get on a plane and go somewhere else. They have to agree to it. And the reason why they agreed to it is because they were told that they were going to be sent somewhere else, that they were going to get all sorts of assistance, including workers' permits. So I'll get to those lies that they were told in just a moment. But let me give you the details on what Ron DeSantis and other Republican governors have been doing when it comes to migrants. The migrant group, which included children, arrived on 2 planes around 3 p.m. without any warning, said the state senator Julian Sear, a Massachusetts Democrat representing Cape Cod, Martha's Vineyard, and Nantucket. Now, officials and volunteers from the island's 6 towns really moved heaven and earth to essentially set up the response that we would do in the event of a hurricane, he said, right? So again, the community all came together and handled this with the same seriousness as they would with like a natural disaster or an upcoming natural disaster. Now, Terry McCormick, who is the press secretary for Governor Charlie Baker of Massachusetts, said in a statement that his administration was in communication with local island officials who were providing short-term shelter services to the migrants. Now, Martha's Vineyard is one of these places in the country where wealthy people, including former presidents like Barack Obama, like to live in, vacation at. So as you can imagine, the housing is incredibly expensive. They also have a shortage of housing. So they're really relying on some of the charitable work being done by churches in the area to accommodate the migrants. But the point I want to make is they're doing what they can to help people out. They're not complaining about it. If anything, they're irritated with how there was no communication. Like, this was a surprise, right? No one was contacted by Ron DeSantis about what he was going to do. So they were caught completely blindsided by this, which made it even more difficult to provide the accommodations and the shelter and the care that these migrants need. But at the same time, I do think this is bringing up a much needed broader discussion about the role of the federal government, because let's say there is a migrant crisis, and right now there is, right? And you have migrants coming into Texas or any other border community. They are not getting the assistance they need from the federal government in order to accommodate the flow of migrants coming into their communities, into their state. Now, the Republican Party, of course, doesn't want them coming in at all. So they're not bringing this issue up in good faith. And I acknowledge that, and I want to be clear about that. But we also have to acknowledge that Congress has for decades dropped the ball when it comes to the immigration issue. These communities absolutely need federal support, not just for border security, but to support migrants coming into the country so the local individuals there don't have an outsized financial burden in providing those accommodations. I think that's a reasonable point to make. Again, I acknowledge that Republicans would actually just much rather not allow anyone in the first place. I do not agree with them on that. But I do think that there is worthy criticism toward the federal government and how they have dropped the ball in providing and allocating the necessary resources for these communities so they can actually take care of the flow of migrants coming in.
Yeah, so let me go over the legitimate critique and illegitimate critique in my mind. So waste of taxpayer money. Yeah, DeSantis is wasting $12 million to fly him out of the state. Okay, fair. Although they would have to spend some money to take care of those immigrants too. That's just reality, okay? And then they say they did lie to them a little bit. And they said there would be expedited proceedings in Massachusetts, and that motivated a lot of them to get on there. But on the other hand, once they got there to Martha's Vineyard, reporters did talk to them, and overall they were treated really well. So, by the way, credit to the left wing there. They're like, oh, Martha's Vineyard, they'll treat them like hell and complain. Well, no, actually they treated them great, but that does mean the immigrants were relatively happy with the trip. So that's just the reality. Is it a publicity stunt? Of course it's a publicity stunt. By the way, Democrats should try it every once in a while because in politics, you need publicity to make your point. Otherwise, no one hears it. So, and the point that the border states are making, kind of, depends on what you call Florida, is, hey, we think we're paying a disproportionate amount here. We don't think the federal government's helping enough. So why not just send them to the blue states? And you guys say you want undocumented immigrants, so you shouldn't have any problem with it. Now, the reality is the blue states don't say we want undocumented immigrants. They say we want a fair process for undocumented immigrants. But I think the argument holds either way. I don't see any reason why the blue states should be complaining. So
honestly, Cenk, I don't really see the blue states complaining, though, right? Like I've actually seen the blue states, to their credit, what they complain about is how there's absolutely no communication, no notification. So, I mean, I would be irritated as someone living in a blue state. And by the way, I mean, California is a border state. So, of course, we have a massive immigrant community, and I don't think they're bad people. I think they enrich the country, but it takes resources to accommodate them, right? And I don't really see these liberal communities complain about that. What I do see them complain about is the lack of communication and how they're blindsided by these surprise planes showing up with migrants that they haven't been prepared to accommodate. And so I understand that criticism.
Yeah, I'm 50-50 on that one too, because, well, yes, that's true. But on the other hand, it's not like undocumented immigrants announced their arrival in Texas either. They're not like, hey, guys, we're coming in a couple of months. You might want to plan ahead. But I get that there is a certain flow of immigration that is more predictable, and that Texas, Arizona, New Mexico, et cetera, can plan around it a little bit better, whereas you're just dropping these folks off. But Anna, keep it real. Like, the blue states are using that as an excuse to complain that these people are coming in the first place, right? I mean, look, the mayor of New York City, Eric Adams, has already started to send him down to, but now this is getting absurd, because we can't have, like, one of the complaints they said is that folks are making a big deal out of in media now is, oh my God, DeSantis might have broken the law here, because the bill that was passed authorizing $12 million says you can send them from this state, and this plane actually originally came from San Antonio. It just had a pit stop in Florida, so the bill doesn't. Guys, you're nitpicking. I mean, you can nitpick all day long. That's never going to stick, and I think it makes you look unreasonable. But now we got planes going from Texas to Florida to Martha's Vineyard, and then some going from Texas to New York to Florida. Okay, now this is getting absurd. So I think it's fair to acknowledge, hey, border states, red states, we should have a fair distribution of funds, which I have always believed in, and because it makes sense. And it's true if a hurricane hits a blue state or a red state. It's also true if immigration hits a red state, that everybody should chip in. And finally, Anna, sorry, real quick, the blue states generally give way more money than the red states to the federal government.
Yeah, I actually looked into that. And Texas, because it's a giant state, also provides quite a bit of tax revenue to the federal government. But look, this is where I think there's a lot of justified criticism toward these Republican governors, because there is some evidence and reporting suggesting that they're lying to the migrants. You can't force the migrants onto a bus or onto a plane. They have to consent. They have to agree to it. So did everyone agree and consent to it? Not really. Some of them were lied to, if not all of them. So as NPR reports, the governor of Florida paid to fly about 50 migrants to Martha's Vineyard. 3 of those migrants told NPR a woman lured them onto the plane, saying they'd be flown to Boston to get expedited work papers. She offered us help. Help never arrived. So does it surprise me that Republican governors and whoever's working on this project with them, this publicity stunt with them, would lie to the migrants to get them on the plane? No, it doesn't surprise me at all. And this is the area where they not only deserve criticism, but should be investigated. You can't be lying to the migrants and telling them stories about how they're going to get expedited workers permits. And one final thing I'll say is, look, if we actually had a federal government that functioned properly and they passed the legislation we so desperately need for immigration reform, which would include the funding necessary for asylum judges, it would include the funding necessary to provide humane living conditions for people as they're awaiting their asylum hearings and all of that, this issue wouldn't be as devastating as it is. This is a broken system, and people are coming here out of fear of the conditions that they're living in their countries. We should deal with this on a federal level. I don't think it's fair for any local community, whether it be a red state, red community, blue community, who cares? What matters here is ensuring that we're providing the best solutions for the issues that we're dealing with. And by the way, we also have a massive worker shortage right now. So all of those stories that we had been hearing about, like, oh, migrants are coming in and they're taking our jobs. We need people to work in America. And the fact that we have restricted the flow of migrants into America has actually been kind of devastating when it comes to this worker shortage. So I think that there could be a plan in place that works for everyone. It's just that we don't have politicians who have any interest in working on that plan.
Yeah, guys. So last thing. So I hear what Anna's saying, and I want to be clear. The idea that the plane didn't stop long enough in Florida, and hence it's illegal, sounds like it's a big stretch to me. On the other hand, lying to people to get them to go somewhere against their wishes, that is a real problem. Okay. And that starts to borderline on kidnapping. I can give you 100 examples of how much you could lie to someone and mislead them and send them to the wrong place. And you begin to see, oh, yeah, right, that's bad. We can't do that. So there needs to be some good regulation on that to make sure they're not breaking the law. But as a general policy matter, if you think it's okay for undocumented immigrants to come into the country to go through a process where we determine whether they're refugees or not, whether they should get to stay or not, which I believe, yes, we should do that, then you should be okay with them coming to any state. So overall, I don't mind if they're in my state or in another state. And I think that if you're a good progressive, you shouldn't mind either.
Well, we got to take a quick break. When we come back, we have more news for you, including an update on the individual who called in a bomb threat at Boston Children's Hospital. Someone has been arrested. We'll tell you who after the break.
All right, back on TYT, Cenk and Anna with you guys. A lot more news. Let's do it, Anna.
Well, we have a positive update on a story that we covered earlier. Federal agents have announced that they have arrested someone in connection to a bomb threat hoax that targeted Boston's Children's Hospital. Now, before we get any further, just want to give you a reminder about what that story had to do with. Back on August 30th of this year, someone called the hospital saying, quote, "This is a bomb, or there is a bomb on the way to the hospital. You better evacuate everybody, you sickos." And then the threat forced police to investigate the threat, of course, and they closed down the immediate area. Now, luckily, there was no bomb and no one was hurt, but I'm glad that the authorities continued investigating this because it was important to figure out who was behind it. And we've learned that it's a woman by the name of Catherine Levy. Levy is charged with making a telephonic bomb threat and appeared in federal court in Boston for a hearing today. And so federal campaign data shows numerous donations made by Catherine Levy of Westfield, Massachusetts, to the Donald J. Trump for President Inc. Group, and also the Trump Make America Great Again Committee and the Republican National Committee. So she is very much a right winger, which makes sense because we've been seeing more and more of these threats, which have been spurred by the disinformation spread by that account, Libs of TikTok. And the latest piece of disinformation that has led to a wave of threats against these hospitals, particularly Boston's Children's Hospital, is this notion that they're doing hysterectomies on underage individuals who identify as transgender. So that is a lie. They called in and spoke to 2 telephone operators over at the hospital. They asked, hey, can someone who's transgender and 16 years old get a hysterectomy? And the operators, who are not medical professionals, who have no idea, said yes, they would be eligible. But obviously that's not true. And the doctors at the hospital made that abundantly clear. But facts don't matter for these people. They're still convinced that they're doing hysterectomies and sex change surgeries on minors at hospitals like Boston's.
Yeah, so look, in the law, there's something called a rebuttable presumption. What it means is, I presume it's going to be like this, but you can rebut it. You can show me that it's not the case. When I watch right-wing media, I have a rebuttable presumption that they're lying. And that presumption does not often get rebutted. But the people watching right-wing media that are right-wingers, they don't know that at all. They don't know that 9 out of 10 times the words coming out of those people's mouths are lies. They nonstop lies. And so there isn't any hysterectomies going on. The hospital, the doctors, the parents, everyone swears up and down. It never happened. It isn't happening. It was made up, right? But does Tucker Carlson come on his show and then say, "Oh, our bad. It turns out the hospital's not doing it," right? And he not only does he not say that, he says they're mutilating the children. They're chopping them up. And he makes it in the most emotionally charged way so that somebody will, quote unquote, do something about it. So, hey, look at that. It turns out right-wingers went to go do something about it, including calling it a bomb threat. Well, think about it. It's a children's hospital. There's sick kids in there. Even if you don't care about doctors and nurses, and these days Republicans are like, doctors, we don't believe any of them. They keep saying that there's a pandemic and that vaccines work. We hate goddamn doctors. Nurses go on strike. They should be made to work nonstop like the goddamn teachers. I know you hate everybody. I got it. But, all right, so even if you get past that, how about the kids? You pretend that you care about the kids. There's sick kids inside the hospital, right? And if you do a bomb threat, they have to take the kids out. What if they're on a ventilator? What if they need around-the-clock treatment? And now you're going to move everybody to the hospital because you were so stupid you believed a guy like Tucker Carlson. Okay, stop being stupid and try different kinds of media. I know corporate media lies in its own way, right? But try to get some sort of real facts in your life and stop violently attacking the rest of us. And yes, this is a form of violence. I'm super glad she was arrested, and she should do real time in jail.
Yeah, and look, I think everyone in the country at this point, because of the way things are set up with the algorithms, everyone lives in their own political filter bubble where they're never presented a different opinion. And if they're ever presented a different opinion, they have such a weird reaction to it. Like the vitriol and the backlash is pretty incredible. I do want to provide you one example because Matt Walsh happens to be one of the individuals out there who's been spreading lies about Boston's Children's Hospital. And it has very real consequences because, as the Daily Beast notes, the hospital has so far received well over a dozen distinct threats, FBI special agent in charge Joseph Volanta told reporters, adding that the matter is being treated as a top priority. With that said, here's a look at what leads to the kind of threats that these people are dealing with.
Today on the Matt Walsh Show, children's hospitals around the country are butchering, mutilating, and sterilizing their young patients. So according to Boston Children's Hospital, literally every toddler who has ever been born or will ever be born is trans. Now, if it seems like they're casting the widest imaginable net in order to catch the most children they can and put them all on a path to sterilization and butchery before they can even talk, well, that's because that's exactly what these monsters are doing. And they've done it up until this moment without much resistance from the public. But that has to end. We have to stop making it so easy on them. And that's why I'm in the very early stages of trying to organize a national coordinated effort to fight back against this evil. You know, it's really just a matter of where do we begin? Maybe we begin at Boston Children's Hospital.
Wow. I mean, look, I try to be as understanding as possible, knowing what our media landscape is like, knowing what algorithms do, knowing that people exist in their own filter bubbles. So I don't like to be overly critical toward people because propaganda is a hell of a drug. But how does anyone listen to that segment and believe what Matt Walsh is saying? How do you listen to that and actually think it's true? Like there isn't a moment in your mind where you might question the accuracy of what he's saying. I mean, and Cenk, like you and I talk about this all the time. I'm actually going to bring a part of that conversation public right now. We might be the only show in the country where the audience is like ready to call us out. Like the audience is ready to question the accuracy of what we're saying. And by the way, I wouldn't have it any other way. But we're literally the only ones. Everyone else has an audience that's like, yes, what you say is 100% true. I'm just going to believe it. I'm going to take it at face value. That is insane. Like, I don't get it. I don't get it. How do you listen to that and think, yeah, nailed it. That must be true. Yeah, that's exactly what's happening at Boston's Children's Hospital.
Yeah, I mean, our audience questions us from time to time. You know why? Because we encourage them to. We say, hey, listen, to make sure you're getting facts, make sure you're getting opinions from different sources, and have an independent judgment for yourself. And by the way, we also talk about how preset ideologies are not necessarily the correct solution 80 years later after they were said, whether they're from the left or the right, et cetera. So we try to cultivate an open-minded audience, and we get an open-minded audience, right? But the rest of media doesn't do that, including corporate media. Corporate media says, okay, no, this is what you need. I mean, we just did a story about it earlier in this show, where CNN and every corporate media outlet is saying, hey, might be a strike of railroad workers, and every one of them frames it as, I can't believe the railroad workers are going to do this to America, right? None of them frame it as, I can't believe the railroad companies are going to do this to America by not sharing 3.5% of their profits with the workers, right? So it's all in the framing when it comes to corporate media and mainstream media. When it comes to right-wing media, well, look, they prey on people who are more gullible. They got to sell that Instahard. And I'm not joking. Like, the con men look for the easiest marks, and the right wing historically in this country has been the easiest mark. It's not an accident that almost all the con men are on their side. So look, our politicians are pretty obvious themselves. They take corporate money and they do whatever their donors tell them, even though the lying media tells you, oh, no, they're having honest debates. But when you have a criminal con man like Donald Trump, he's not going to go to the left. If the left is where the suckers were, he'd go to the left. When you have an outlet like Fox News that just wants to, brainwash people with obvious, absurd lies for profit, they're not going to go to the left. They're going to go to the right because it's easier marks. So, I mean, Anna, how many times have we heard a story in a production meeting that seems to favor our side, and we go, you guys sure? Because that sounds too much, right? And then we look into it and we research it, et cetera, right? Whereas Fox News sees and Daily Wire and all these guys, they come up with the most ridiculous lies that a child could tell isn't true. Really, at Boston Children's Hospital, they think every kid is trans, and then they're taking these kids and they're mutilating them and chopping them up. They're doing it to every kid. Like, you'd really have to be. God.
Okay, I mean, look.
To say it, but you're the marks. You're the suckers at the table. That's why con men who are obvious liars like Matt Walsh, one of the most obvious, dumbest liars in American media, can trick people. That's super sad.
Also, just follow the logic of what he's saying, right? So, oh my God, they're brutalizing these children. We must do something. So what, like bomb the hospital? What happens to the children in the children's hospital then? And by the way, like, I don't mean to open this up because I know it's a heated debate and I really don't feel like engaging in that debate. But if you want to talk about genital mutilation, I mean, it does circumcision count, or is circumcision okay because it's a religious thing for most people, not everyone. Some people do it for whatever. It's cleaner, safer, whatever they think it is. But it's just amazing how genital mutilation in some cases totally fine. Genital mutilation in their minds, in the case of someone who identifies as trans, not okay. We must bomb the hospital.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, Anna, you're 100% right. And then I got to say two things about that. If we did the same thing and we said, hey, there's this hospital, it's a Catholic hospital or some sort of a religious hospital, and they're chopping up little kids' body parts. They're doing genital mutilations, this thing they call circumcision. Well, it's technically true. They are, all those hospitals do circumcision. I mean, you could frame it as genital mutilation. I wouldn't frame it that way, but you could. And then they are chopping things, right? And so we could say it that way and be like, isn't somebody going to do anything about it? They think all the kids should be chopped up, and they're chopping them up right now. Like, we would never do that because we're not outrageous liars who are trying to provoke violence like Matt Walsh is. So he knows that they're not doing it to all the kids. He knows they're not doing it to any of the kids. And so they're just more immoral than we are. They have no morality. They're evil people like Matt Walsh. They're disgusting sickos. And their side is more prone to violence. They know that, so they want to egg it on because they think
Well, we can't win with ideas because we're idiots. So we have to lie and we have to provoke violence in order to win. That's how dumb people win, through violence. So that's what he wants, and that's what he's getting. So we would never do that to them because we are moral human beings, unlike they are.
All right, we got to take a break. When we come back, we have more news for you, including one of the most entitled cops, and that's really saying something. So entitled that she felt the need to put an insane rant on social media. Later, she took it down after there was backlash, but we've got a copy of it. That and more coming up in the second hour.
Thanks for listening to the full episode of The Young Turks. Support our work, listen ad-free, access members-only bonus content, and more by subscribing to Apple Podcasts at apple.co/TYT. I'm your host, Cenk Uygur, and I'll see you soon.